God, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
What if life is more complicated than that? What if God's not, which I don't think he does, what if he doesn't program everything and then hit the return button on his computer and just set us off where, okay, he's going to have a trial right there and I want him to go through this and blah, blah, blah. What if it's more complicated? Because it's relational, right? We're not in a simulation. We're in a relationship. God doesn't want us hedging our bets. Okay, God, I'm going to ask you for this, but I'm going to have this backup game plan B because I don't really trust your character and your nature.
Yeah. Welcome to Down to Earth Theology Matters. I'm your host, Pastor Bryan Threlkeld. I'm the Executive Director of True Grace Ministries International, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jason Peters, who's the Greek professor at the Grace School of Theology, and we are going through the book of James. So if you missed the first couple episodes, you'll want to go back and check them out because we're already in James chapter 1. We left off in verse 5.
Right.
And I'm going to read verses 2 to 8 just to give you a little context here and then turn it over to Dr. Peters. So here we go. This is James 1, verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. All right, so that's 2 to 8. And now we're going to back up to verse 5, which says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So Dr. Peters, take it from me.
All right. Well, you pretty much summed it up there. And
now verse 10.
So just kind of looking back at some unique things about James, because we tend to read Paul, his letters, and we tend to go into James. And, we talked a little bit about that. Paul never uses imperatives like direct commands early in his letters, ever. But with James in verse 2, this word to consider is an imperative. In verse 4, you have an imperative for Aketo. It's to have or to hold, but it has an imperative force. Like you need this endurance needs to have its complete work. And then in verse 5, where we're at, now he takes this idea that you could be lacking in something. Imagine that, believers that don't have it all together. That's me.
Show me that.
And he says, now, okay, so if any of you, my brothers, keep in mind, you must consider it, knowing that the testing of your faith, you need to do this so that you would not be lacking. But if any of you are lacking, they need to ask for wisdom. He's not saying, hey, it's a good idea, maybe.
Yeah, no.
There's some force behind it.
And by the way, an imperative just means a command.
Yeah.
So if you hear that term imperative, it's basically, hey, this is what you need to do. It's a kind of a forceful command.
It is, because you have lots of different ways in language to get to ask people or to tell people to do what you want to do. You can do it in a question format. Hey, do you think it would be a good idea to get some biblical wisdom? To ask for some biblical wisdom. Hey, you really should think about asking for some biblical wisdom. Or you need to, as James is doing, you finger point, you need to ask if you're lacking wisdom. You need to ask. And then he does something interesting in verse 5. He doesn't just say, ask God. He's already introduced God in verse 1. He characterizes God in a particular way.
He does.
Because he wants the believers that are dispersed to think about God in this particular text, of all the ways they could think about God, in that he nuances it in their minds. The God who's this giving God gives to all, and he does it without any kind of reservation.
That's a good.
God's giving without partiality. Oh, you're a really good Christian, I'm gonna give you a little more wisdom. The really bad Christian, me. Nope. No, this God is giving, and he doesn't do it with any kind of reproach or in anything. God's not doing something out of the wrong motive. And James is reminding his audience of that. And so he says, if any of you, is lacking wisdom, he has to ask from this kind of God. This is who God is, and I think the reason he does that is because a lot of times people think that God is the one who gives the trial, who gives the hard situation, who is actually somewhat vindictive and goes after us. And James seems to be correcting that idea. And like, if you're in a trial, then a lot of times it's natural to ask, God, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
What if life is more complicated than that? What if God's not, which I don't think he does, what if he doesn't program everything and then hit the return button on his computer and just set us off where, okay, he's going to have a trial right there, and I want him to go through this and blah, blah, blah. What if it's more complicated? Because it's relational, right? We're not in a simulation, we're in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so now you have this God who is this giving God, and he's giving out of his goodness, of his nature and his character, and it'll be given to him. Okay. So, I know your favorite Bible verse is Philippians 4:13, because you love how it's used in our culture. This is another one probably that you've seen that could be used in a myriad of interesting ways.
Yeah, as you say, is referencing, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can go lift 450 pounds at the gym because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can be a pro NBA player, even though I'm 5'8" and at 60 years old. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, there's a context here. But coming back to, yeah, you just can't. Well, whatever I ask of God, he's going to dump on me. But I love the fact, if any of you likes wisdom, we should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. Now, I see a God here who is generous. And again, we talked about how James references back to Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount particularly, but to Jesus's teachings more than any other New Testament writer. And I think about Jesus saying, if you, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? I think that may be in his mind as he's writing it. So we have a good God. And Jesus is saying, if we're broken, we're fallen, we're evil by comparison to God, and we know how to give good gifts, we know how to care for our children, we love our children, we give generously, want to give generously, at least if we're a good parent, right? Then how much more so would the God who loves us, created us, died for us? I mean, how much more would God want to give to his children? And that's the kind of gracious God that we serve. And I think when we have that view of God, where he's just up there just looking to find fault as sinners in the hands of an angry God, that kind of view of God, I think we've missed who God is, who Jesus said his Father is. And another clause here is so good, is without finding fault. See, we kind of think, well, God will give generously to us unless we have issues in our life. Like, he's going to go, well, I would have given you this, Jason, but man, you got this problem over here and here and here and here. Like, he's not going to nitpick and find fault, that he wants to give generously. So maybe elaborate a little bit on that as we come before our perfect Heavenly Father, he wants us to ask for these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up well. Is God is not judging his gift giving on on our performance.
Boy, say that again. That was so good.
That God's not giving his
Not judging his gift giving based on your performance.
Yeah, that's that again right there. Yeah, I was paying attention. That's and think about it. When you get to that place, if you're going through something and you're holding on to your faith and you know your faith is being stretched and you're having to press in and endure, you don't have much in there to perform. Like the performance thing, you're not going to muster up. I know I've been through some really hard times in my life, in a variety of different areas of my life. And really the only thing I could do was ask God for wisdom and how to navigate the situation. I maybe I was in sin, maybe I wasn't at the time. I didn't know how to clean up before God before I came to ask him. But I think what you're saying, some of what you're saying is we don't have to clean ourselves up before we come and ask God for the wisdom we need to live rightly in the trial that we're in. And that was one beautiful of the many beautiful things about Jesus, why I'm captivated by him, you are, is that you didn't have to make yourself good enough to come into his presence.
Yeah.
And I think here it's the same thing. We don't have to be good enough to receive the gift. And by the way, in larger Mediterranean culture, gift giving came with strings attached. So James is very countercultural here. I mean, if you read, Barclay's book on gift giving and you read Harrison's book on grace in the first century, so much of the gift giving is strings attached. You have patron-client relationships, benefactor relationships everywhere. And then you have this giving God who gives, and he's not attaching strings to it. Yes, he desires us to use the wisdom he gives us and all that, but he's not attaching strings to it. And that's what makes our God so unique from any false gods that are out there, is our God is actually in real time gracious.
Yes.
Yes. But we hit verse 6. And so now James qualifies this. The thing that God desires from us is trust.
Without faith, it is impossible to please God.
That's right. That's right. And so I don't think James is throwing Peter under the bus, but we were talking earlier that this is like, if I was a preacher, I may cross-reference over and go, hey, remember Peter, of he's walking on water in faith in Christ. There's waves. James is fantastic. For all you preachers out there, he uses great illustrations that people would understand. We were talking, don't use a 1940s illustration to 20-year-olds. Ain't going to hit ring. That's right. But he says, ask in faith without doubting. And then he gives the explanation. Why? Because that's probably a natural question that would come up in the mind of a listener or a reader. Why? Because the doubting one is like this particular kind of situation, right? Where you're just being tossed around. You've been on a boat.
Yeah. You're just,
and you feel sick and you're driven by the wind and you're tossed about. And the surf of the sea is rocking you and you just don't even know. God doesn't want us to approach him as the maybe God, because James has said he's going to do this, that we need to take God at his word.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we shouldn't expect God to give us wisdom if we don't actually trust him for it.
Yeah, that's what we'd say.
Yeah. And that goes into the very nature of trust, right? God doesn't want us hedging our bets. Okay, God, I'm going to ask you for this, but I'm going to have this backup game plan B because I don't really trust your character and your nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way of the world, right? Is I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this backup plan. It's all about me.
Yeah.
I can only trust myself. I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, blah, 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 blah. And God said, no, go all in. James is telling us that God is our Father. Christ is our Savior, King, wants us to go all in. And that's what you see here for the doubting man, is like this. And that guy should not suppose he's going to receive anything from the Lord. Very interesting, just for all you super nerdy people out there. In verse 7, seemingly he's referring to God when he says, "Curio," which is a particular form of the word "curios." But the person that he refers to in verse 1 as curios is actually Jesus. So for James, God and Jesus are on the same level. So you got any Unitarian friends out there? You got any Jehovah's Witnesses out there? You got any people that are thinking Jesus is not divine? Well, in James's mind, he was.
Yeah, he's already identified that. Just quick, coming back to the Peter illustration, in case people were tracking the story of Jesus is walking on water toward the boat. There's a storm going on. Peter sees him and says, "Jesus, if that's you, just tell me to come to you." And Jesus is like, "Come on, walk across these waves, walk through this storm." And Peter starts. He hops out of the boat. He starts to walk on the water, and then it says he took his eyes off of Jesus. He looked around. It's like, "Whoa, this is crazy turbulence here. What's going on?" And then he begins to sink because he started in faith, but then he started to doubt. And that's what happened here. And so that may be something that James had in mind. That story became, a part of the gospel records. And so because of that, I think it's a great illustration because they were used to being on boats and tossed and turned, and they knew what that was like. And so I think what we see over and over again, hearkening back to Jesus, how many times in the Gospels did Jesus say, "Your faith has made you well"? Woman with the bleeding who touches the garment, the Gentile centurion who believes that God will heal his servant, and just on and on and on. I mean, you got over and over and over again, you have illustrations where Jesus honors and makes it very clear that because of your faith, this will be done to you. Not because you were living right, again, not finding fault. He's not looking at your track record, so to speak, and all your works. He's looking for you to trust him, that when I say something, you can believe me. And so I think that's key. Really, the whole Christian life is lived by faith. And yet we do have a natural propensity to come back and say, "Well, I don't know if I can ask God for this. I haven't been living right. I've been doing X, Y, and Z. And then let me clean up my act first, and then I'll come to God in faith."
Yeah, and one thing to be clear, I think maybe some people read over is in verse 7, it says that man shouldn't suppose, like maybe bet on that he's going to receive anything, but it doesn't, or be confident in it, but it doesn't say that God's not going to give it still.
Yeah.
Right. And so depending on what you think about the grace of God, is how you're going to fill that in. So I would just encourage people to not use verse 7 as, well, there are strings attached with God's giving. No, James is just saying this person who he describes in verse 8 is the same person is the verse 8 person, right? Is a double-minded man who's unstable in all of his ways. He shouldn't suppose that he's going to receive anything. He might.
Right.
But he shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Right. And so then when we roll into verse 9,
here we go.
Right. So now he goes from man to brother. So now he brings up brother language again. And there's another command, and it's a weird command. It's like the humble brother, the brother of humble means, must boast, like not is boasting or should boast. It's another imperative. Must boast in what? In this. It's this weird. It's kind of a weird Greek phrase, if it is, but it comes out to like his high position, which for again a first century mind would be like he's in a really honored place, right? So it's this kind of like oxymoron.
Blessed are the poor.
Yeah,
spirit.
That's right. No, it's same matter. So yeah, same kind of thing. And so now what we do as good Bible readers is we first go, because verse 9 seems a little disconnected, but it's not. He's probably now talking about a particular trial. Okay, the man who's in these humble circumstances, hard circumstances, should have complete confidence. That's what this Greek word really means. It's not an arrogant boasting, maybe in some context, but really just the kind of the general idea is like complete confidence in his high position. And then he gives a contrast, like a good preacher. The rich guy, should have complete confidence in his humble position. Why? Well, James now gives another illustration of what this rich guy is like. A blade of grass or like a petal on a flower is going to pass by. It's going to fall off. It's not something that's going to be there forever. The rich man's riches will not be there forever. Jesus had a lot to say about this, right? Store up your treasure where? In heaven, right? Because the treasures on earth the moth is going to destroy and rust is going to make irrelevant. And then he gives more picture, right, of the rich guy. The sun's going to come and he's going to, with burning heat, it's going to, rise up and shine down. Then it's going to wither the grass. And then his blade or the flower, the petal of it is going to fall off. Okay. It's talking about a flower until the next clause, right? And then the beauty of his, and again, this is where Greek is kind of fun. He just uses the word for face as appearance. Nosopa, here's, pasopu. His appearance is ruined. It's lost. It changes. And now he says, in the same way, the rich man too will be withered away, will be ruined in his journeys, but it's really the idea of in the things he's pursuing. Why? Because he's not pursuing the right things in the right way. And so the poor man looks to be exalted because he doesn't have these problems. He doesn't have these trials. And in this reversal kind of way James talks, the rich man actually has these trials in his riches and his pursuits that he's got to humble himself regarding. Otherwise, he's going to actually ruin his life in all of his pursuits. It's really fascinating the way he does it.
Well, and it's harkening back to Jesus, right? You can't serve both God and money. Jesus talked a lot about how money gets in the way. But again, you said this earlier, we're flipping worldly wisdom with spiritual wisdom. So worldly wisdom says, oh man, the low guy that doesn't have much money or is poor, and then, oh, this rich guy, he's up here. And what James is doing is, whoop, no, not really. The low guy is really up here, and the rich guy is potentially in danger because those riches can interfere with that. And again, it comes back to our overarching theme. So it seems like he does a little bit of a rabbit trail here, but it's in line with where he's going, because it's spiritual wisdom leads to spiritual maturity. And he's talking about things that can get in the way of that. In this case, riches and flip-flopping the lowly. The least will be first will be last. Those kind of concepts are all over here. And again, you see it harkening back to Jesus. I just see it over and over again. James is referencing the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and so for us, we're thinking about this whole, we'll say 2 through 11.
Mm-hmm.
The spiritual wisdom leading to spiritual maturity is found in how we deal with trials.
Mm-hmm.
What we're asking of God in the midst of our trials.
And how we should go to God in the midst of our trials.
That's right. Yep. And what we think about God when we ask.
Yeah.
And then, and then the world says our circumstances lead into our status.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But spiritual wisdom says it's not our temporal circumstances that have anything to do with our position for the Lord. And that in and of itself in America is massively important. It's massively important for a wealthy believer to read this and take a step back and go, what am I doing with the material possessions and the resources that God has entrusted me with? Am I going to use spiritual wisdom, with my resources, or am I not? And for the wealthy people in my life that are following Jesus, the way they give and the generosity that they display has led to them growing spiritually and not depending on, a lot of amounts of money that may be in their bank account. It's so practical. James is so good.
Yeah, it really is. And now, where we'll pick up next week, we're talking about blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. And so we're back again to James 1:2-4, that overarching theme of persevering in the midst of whatever you're going through in life. And so that's where we'll pick it up next week on Down to Earth Theology Matters. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hey, as you're doing some homework each and every week, you want something to do, continue to read James chapter 1. And I would just say reading that over and over again. So every time I read a chapter or a book of the Bible, it's like God reveals something fresh, something new to me. So keep reading through this, and then you'll come to the text with questions potentially. In the future, we may end up having some live sessions where you can chime in. But if you're watching online, or you're on the YouTube channel, be sure wherever you're at, click subscribe, like us, and if you've got comments, put them below. We'll check those out. And hey, who knows? We may address some of the questions that you're coming up with as you're studying through the book of James. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next week on Down to Earth Theology Matters.